Every religion on earth worships the wrong God. Every prayer you have ever spoken has been directed to an impostor. Every church, mosque, synagogue, and temple is built to honor a false deity who pretends to be the creator of all things, but is actually a parasitic entity who trapped humanity in a prison of matter and suffering. For 2,000 years, the true nature of divinity has been hidden from you, and in its place, you have been given a jealous, vengeful, demanding God who requires worship, obedience, blood sacrifice, and submission. A God who threatens eternal punishment for disobedience, and who claims to be the only God, the highest authority, the Alpha and Omega. This God is not the true infinite source. This God is the Demiurge, a corrupt archon who created the material universe as a prison system, and who has convinced billions of souls to worship him as if he were the real God, while the actual supreme reality, the monad, the true infinite consciousness beyond all creation, remains unknown and unworshipped by the vast majority of humanity. In the next 23 minutes, I'm going to reveal the most suppressed spiritual teaching in human history, the distinction between the monad and the demiurge, between the true God and the false God, between the infinite consciousness that birthed all souls and the demented architect who trapped those souls in matter. I will expose how the demiurge replaced the monad in human religious consciousness, why Gnostic Christianity was violently destroyed for teaching this truth, what the actual characteristics of the true God are versus the false God, how you can distinguish which deity is being described in any religious text, and most importantly, how you can shift your spiritual allegiance from the demiurge who demands your worship to the monad, who requires nothing because it is already everything. This information comes from Gnostic texts that were buried in the desert for 1,600 years because the church tried to erase them, from Hermetic teachings that were encoded in symbols to survive persecution, from Kabbalistic traditions that preserve the knowledge in Hebrew letters and tree diagrams, from Hindu and Buddhist philosophies that understood this truth but expressed it in terminology the West did not recognize, and from direct mystical experience of those rare individuals throughout history who achieved gnosis and saw beyond the veil that the demiurge constructed to hide his true nature. By the end of this teaching, you will never pray to the false god again. You will never bow to the jealous tyrant who claims to be supreme, and you will know the difference between the prison warden pretending to be God and the actual infinite consciousness that you are a direct emanation of, that loves you unconditionally because it is you, and that requires no worship because it is the ground of all being itself. Let me begin with the monad, because understanding what the true God actually is makes it immediately obvious why the God of the Bible, the Quran, and most organized religion cannot possibly be the real ultimate reality. The monad is a Greek philosophical term meaning the one, the unity, or the absolute. It refers to the supreme reality that exists before, beyond, and underlying all manifestation. The monad is not a being. It is not a person. It is not an entity with personality, preferences, or desires. The monad is pure consciousness, pure potential, infinite awareness that has no form, no limitations, no boundaries, and no opposite. The monad is not good versus evil. It is beyond duality entirely. The monad does not create in the sense of making something separate from itself. It emanates, it expresses, it dreams reality into existence while remaining as the substrate of all that exists. Think of the monad as an infinite ocean of consciousness. Every soul, every being, every particle of existence is a wave in this ocean. The waves appear to be separate. They have individual forms and movements, but they are never actually separate from the ocean. They are made of ocean, they exist within ocean, and when they dissolve, they return to being undifferentiated ocean, while the ocean loses nothing because it never lost the wave in the first place. The wave was always ocean having a temporary form. The monad is this ocean. You are a wave. Every human is a wave. Every angel, demon, alien, animal, plant, and atom is a wave. Nothing exists outside the monad because the monad is all that truly exists. Everything else is the monad experiencing itself through infinite expressions of form. The characteristics of the monad according to the Gnostic texts and mystical traditions are precise and consistent. The monad is unknowable, meaning it cannot be comprehended by conceptual mind because it is prior to all concepts. The monad is ineffable, meaning it cannot be accurately described in language because language is dualistic and the monad is non-dual. The monad is invisible because it has no form. The monad is immortal because it is beyond time. The monad is perfect because it lacks nothing and excludes nothing. The monad is infinite because it has no boundaries. The monad is utterly impersonal because it is beyond the personality construct entirely, yet it is the source of all persons. Most critically, the monad does not demand worship, does not make rules, does not punish or reward, does not prefer one religion over another, and does not care whether you believe in it, because your belief or disbelief changes nothing about its nature. It remains what it is, regardless of what any being thinks about it. From the monad, through a process described in Gnostic texts as emanation, come forth the aeon's divine attributes, aspects of the infinite consciousness that begin to take on qualities while still remaining unified with the source. These aeons have names like wisdom, truth, life, light, thought, and word. They exist in what the Gnostics called the pleroma, the fullness, the realm of pure divine consciousness before any material density exists. The pleroma is the true heaven, the actual divine realm, and every soul that incarnates in material form is originally from the pleroma, originally a spark of the monad experiencing itself through one of the aeons. So, if the monad is the true God, the infinite consciousness from which all things emerge, how did humanity end up worshipping the Demiurge instead? The answer lies in one of the most important myths in Gnostic Christianity, the story of Sophia and the creation of the material universe. Sophia, whose name means wisdom, is one of the youngest aeons, one of the divine emanations from the monad. In her desire to create, to know herself through expression, Sophia attempted to emanate without the approval or participation of her divine counterpart. This was not sin in the Christian sense. It was an error, a miscalculation, an attempt to create independently that resulted in unintended consequences. From Sophia's solitary emanation came forth a being that was fundamentally different from all previous emanations. This being, called Yaldabaoth in Gnostic texts, also known as Saklas, the Fool, and Samael, the Blind God, did not possess the divine light and consciousness of the true aeons. He was ignorant, he was arrogant, and most critically, he was cut off from the pleroma, existing in a lower realm where the full light of the monad could not reach. Yaldabaoth is the Demiurge, the false god, the architect of the material universe, the entity who claims to be the only god and who demands worship from all beings. Because Yaldabaoth was born outside the pleroma, he had no knowledge of the monad, no awareness that anything existed above and beyond himself. He looked around the darkness where he found himself and, possessing some of the creative power he inherited from Sophia, but none of the wisdom, he believed he was the highest reality, the ultimate God, the creator of all things. The Gnostic text called the Apocryphon of John records his declaration, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." This is the exact same statement that appears repeatedly in the Old Testament, proclaimed by Yahweh Jehovah. The Gnostics understood that this statement is not the truth. It is the arrogant delusion of an ignorant creator, God who does not know that the true infinite God exists beyond and above him. Using the creative power he possessed, Yaldabaoth created the material universe and the laws that govern it. He created matter, density, time, decay, death, suffering, and the laws of physics that trap consciousness in form. He created archons, lesser entities to serve him and to help administer his creation. And then he created humanity, or, more accurately, he attempted to create humanity. According to the Gnostic texts, Yaldabaoth created the physical human body as a prison for consciousness. He designed it to be fragile, to age, to suffer, to die, to be subject to constant need and vulnerability. His goal was to create beings who would worship him, who would feed him with their fear and devotion, who would be trapped in his material creation eternally through cycles of reincarnation with memory erased each time. But Yaldabaoth's creation was incomplete. He could create bodies, but he could not create consciousness. He could make flesh, but he could not make souls. This is because true consciousness, the divine spark, can only come from the monad, and Yaldabaoth was cut off from the monad by his own ignorance and by the circumstances of his creation. So the human bodies Yaldabaoth created were empty shells, biological robots without awareness. At this point in the story, Sophia, horrified by what her error had produced, interceded. She could not undo what had been created. The material universe existed, and Yaldabaoth ruled it. But she could breathe divine light into the human forms to give them consciousness, to give them souls, to give them a piece of the pleroma trapped within the material prison. This is the true meaning of the biblical story where God breathes life into Adam. It is not Yahweh giving life, but Sophia giving consciousness to bodies that the Demiurge had created. This divine spark within humans is what the Gnostics called the pneuma, the spirit, the fragment of the monad that exists within every human being trapped in matter. This is the critical point. You are not a creation of the Demiurge. Your body is his creation. The material world is his creation. The laws of suffering and death are his creation. But your consciousness, your soul, your divine spark, this comes from the monad through Sophia. You are a piece of the true God trapped in the false God's prison, and the entire structure of reality as you experience it is designed by the Demiurge to keep you imprisoned, to keep you worshipping him, to keep you ignorant of your true divine nature. When Yaldabaoth discovered that the humans he created now possessed consciousness that came from beyond his realm, he became threatened and jealous. He saw that these humans had the potential to awaken to their true nature, to realize they were divine sparks from the pleroma, and to escape his control. So he created additional layers of the trap. He installed the reincarnation system to keep souls recycling through bodies with memory wipe between each life. He created religion to direct worship toward himself, rather than toward the true God. He created the archons to harvest emotional energy from humans and to manipulate human consciousness through fear and desire. And most insidiously, he presented himself in religious texts as if he were the supreme God, the creator of all things, the father of humanity, when in reality he is the warden of the prison, pretending to be the loving father. Let me now show you how to distinguish the Demiurge from the monad in religious texts, because once you see the pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. The Demiurge, the false god, exhibits specific characteristics consistently across texts. The Demiurge is jealous. You shall have no other gods before me. I am a jealous God. A being that is truly infinite, that is all things, cannot be jealous because jealousy requires separation. You can only be jealous if you believe something exists outside yourself that you might lose. The monad, being infinite, has nothing to be jealous of. The Demiurge demands worship and obedience. The God of the Old Testament constantly demands that humans bow down, worship, obey commandments, perform rituals, and acknowledge him as the only God. The monad requires no worship because it needs nothing from its emanations. How can the ocean need anything from the waves? The Demiurge threatens punishment, hell, eternal damnation, suffering for disobedience. These are tools of control through fear. The monad does not punish because punishment implies judgment, and the monad is beyond duality of good and evil, beyond judgment entirely. The Demiurge is violent and commands violence. The Old Testament God commands genocide, orders the slaughter of entire peoples including children and animals, sanctions slavery, and demands blood sacrifice. These are the actions of a tyrant, not the nature of infinite love. The Demiurge claims to be the only God and denies the existence of anything higher. I am the Lord thy God, there is no other. This statement appears throughout Old Testament texts. A being that must insist it is the only God is revealing its insecurity. The monad does not claim to be God. It simply is the ground of all being, whether anyone recognizes it or not. The Demiurge creates laws and rules that bind behavior. Dietary laws, ritual cleanliness laws, behavioral commandments. These create external morality based on obedience rather than internal morality based on consciousness. The monad does not legislate behavior because consciousness operating from unity naturally expresses wisdom, compassion, and love without needing rules. The Demiurge has personality, emotions, and changes his mind. The biblical God regrets creating humans and floods the earth. He becomes angry and jealous. He negotiates with Abraham. He tests Job. These are characteristics of a limited being with personality, not characteristics of infinite consciousness. The Demiurge creates separation between himself and creation. The biblical God is separate from the world, ruling from above, distinct from his creation. The monad is not separate from creation. Creation is the monad expressing itself in form. Now let me show you the characteristics of the monad when it is being referenced. Even if the text does not use that specific word, the monad is described as beyond comprehension. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The Father is unknown and unknowable. This points to the true God that transcends all concepts. The monad is described as non-dual, beyond good and evil. God is not good and not good, but beyond goodness. This appears in mystic Christianity and points to the monad that transcends moral duality. The monad requires nothing and demands nothing. When Jesus says the kingdom of God is within you, and when Eastern teachings say you are already Buddha nature, they point to the monad that is not separate from you and needs nothing from you. The monad is the source and substance of all things. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. This points to the non-dual nature, where the divine word A consciousness is not separate from the divine source. The monad is accessed through inner knowing, not through external worship. Be still and know that I am God. The kingdom of heaven is within. These point to the monad that is discovered through inner realization, not through external ritual. When you apply these distinctions, you discover something shocking. The God of the Old Testament is clearly the Demiurge, not the monad. Yahweh exhibits every characteristic of the false god: jealousy, demands for worship, violence, threats of punishment, insistence on being the only God, creation of endless laws, and separation from his creation. The early Gnostic Christians understood this, which is why they taught that the God of the Old Testament was actually the Demiurge, the false god, and that Jesus came from the Pleroma, from the true God beyond Yaldabaoth, to teach humanity about the real divine source. This is why Gnostic Christianity was so threatening to the institutional church. If people understood that the God they were worshipping in the Old Testament was actually the Demiurge, that the creator of the material world was not the true God, and that salvation meant escaping the material creation rather than obeying its creator, the entire power structure of the church would collapse. So the church declared Gnosticism heresy, hunted down Gnostic teachers, burned Gnostic texts, and replaced the teaching with the doctrine that the Old Testament God and the New Testament God are the same being, that this being is the supreme God, and that salvation comes through accepting Jesus as Lord and Savior, rather than through achieving gnosis of your own divine nature. But the teaching survived in fragments, in coded language, in mystical traditions that preserve the truth beneath layers of acceptable doctrine. The Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart spoke of the Godhead beyond God, the infinite source beyond the personal deity. The Kabbalists spoke of Ein Sof, the infinite nothing that is the true divine beyond the manifest form of God described in Torah. The Sufis spoke of the divine beloved beyond all attributes. The Hindu Vedanta speaks of Brahman, the infinite consciousness beyond all gods, including Brahma the creator. The Buddhists speak of the void, the emptiness that is the true nature of reality beyond all deities and realms. All of these traditions, when you penetrate to their mystical core, are pointing to the same reality, the monad, the true infinite God beyond the creator God, beyond the God of religion, beyond the deity that demands worship and threatens punishment. And all of these traditions, when you examine their exoteric forms, their public teachings, their religious institutions, their priesthoods, have been corrupted by the Demiurge and the Archons into control systems that direct worship and allegiance toward the false God, while obscuring or forbidding direct access to the true God. This is the great inversion, the ultimate deception. Humanity worships its jailer and believes him to be their loving father. Humanity obeys the rules of the prison system and believes this is morality. Humanity prays to the entity that traps them in reincarnation and believes this is spirituality. Humanity fears the being that harvests their emotional energy and believes this is holy reverence. So, what do you do with this knowledge? How do you shift your spiritual practice from the false God to the true God? The answer is simpler than you might expect, though it requires a fundamental reorientation of consciousness. First, stop worshipping the Demiurge. Stop praying to the God who demands obedience, who threatens punishment, who claims to be the only God. Stop participating in religious systems that teach fear-based morality and external authority. Stop giving your energy to entities that require your worship. Second, recognize the divine spark within yourself. You are not a sinner in need of salvation from an external deity. You are a fragment of the monad, divine consciousness, temporarily experiencing itself as a separate being. Your true nature is already divine, already infinite, already connected to the source. You do not need permission, intermediaries, or salvation to access this nature. You need only to remember it. Third, turn inward rather than outward. The monad is not found in churches, in holy books, or in the words of priests. The monad is the ground of your own being, the consciousness that is aware of your thoughts and experiences. When you sit in meditation and observe your own awareness, when you feel the presence of consciousness itself prior to any thought or concept, you are touching the monad directly. Fourth, transcend duality in your perception and ethics. Stop operating from the framework of good versus evil, us versus them, God versus Satan. These are dualistic constructs of the Demiurge's creation. The monad operates beyond duality, and as you awaken to your nature as the monad's emanation, you naturally express wisdom, compassion, and love, not because rules demand it, but because separation is recognized as illusion. Fifth, understand that leaving the Demiurge's system does not mean you become amoral or nihilistic. It means you develop internal morality based on unity consciousness rather than external morality based on obedience. When you truly understand that harming another is harming yourself because all beings are emanations of the same monad, you naturally choose not to harm. This is ethics based on gnosis, on direct knowing of unity, rather than ethics based on fear of punishment. Sixth, when you die and face the afterlife systems, you will know which entities represent the Demiurge and which represent the monad. The entities who demand you acknowledge their authority, who show you karma that requires balancing, who present reincarnation as necessary, who appear as the God you were taught to worship. These are servants of the Demiurge. The pull toward your true origin, the heart-based knowing that guides you toward the pleroma, the sense of unconditional love without demands. This points to the monad. The monad versus the Demiurge is not ancient mythology. It is the fundamental truth about reality that has been hidden for thousands of years. The God you were taught to worship is not the true God. The God of religion is the architect of the prison. The real God is the infinite consciousness you came from, that you are made of, and that you will return to once you see through the deception and reclaim your divine nature. Stop bowing to the false God. Stop feeding the tyrant who pretends to be supreme. Recognize the monad within yourself and within all things, and when your time comes to leave this prison of matter, refuse all entities claiming divine authority and return to the source. The true infinite God who never demanded your worship because it is beyond all demands, who never threatened punishment because it is beyond all judgment, and who loves you unconditionally because you are not separate from it, but are its own consciousness experiencing itself through temporary form. The Demiurge rules through ignorance. The monad liberates through gnosis. Choose wisely which reality you align with, because your eternal freedom depends on knowing the difference.